there are more waters rising. This I know, this I know. There are more waters rising. This I know. There are more waters rising. They will find their way to me. There are more waters rising. This I know, this I know. There are more waters rising. This I know.
There are more fires burning. This I know, this I know. There are more fires burning. This I know. There are more fires burning. They will find their way to me. There are more fires burning. This I know, this I know. There are more fires burning. This I know. Mountains falling. This I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling. This I know. There are more mountains falling. They will find their way to me. There are more mountains falling. This I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling. This I know. I will wade through the waters. This I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters. This I know. I will wade through the waters. When they find their way to me, we will wade through the waters. This I know, this I know. We will wade through the waters. This I know.
I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know. I will walk through the fire when they find their way to me. I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know.
I will rebuild the mountains. This I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains. This I know.
I will rebuild the mountains when they find their way to me.
I will rebuild the mountains. This I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains. This I know.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary, and I'm delighted to be your worship associate this morning. It is good to have you with us. We acknowledge that our FirstU campus is located on traditional, unsurrendered, and unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, and that the work of reconciliation is a responsibility of our congregation and of all Canadians. Our goal is to educate ourselves and all who have ears to hear, to be of service to those who are at risk, and to advocate for justice. Normally, if you would like information about FirstU, it would be available at the welcome table at the back of the pews. However, while the FirstU building is closed because of the COVID-19 virus, you may instead contact us through email at welcome@firstunitarianottawa.ca. Our normal hospitality hour will follow this service as a virtual get-together. If you would like to join us for the hospitality hour on Zoom, please see our website, www.firstunitarianottawa.ca, or our weekly email newsletter, the EUU, for information on how to do so. At this time, staff are working remotely and are monitoring emails during usual working hours. You will find their remote work phone numbers and direct emails on the staff directory page of our website. It is more important than ever to sign up to receive the EUU, our weekly email newsletter, check our Facebook page and our web page for notices and updates. Our online calendar is as full as ever, albeit much of it virtually. And now an announcement from NAO. Please note that the RE program is taking place this afternoon at 2 p.m. Meet on campus. All are welcome. Whatever your heritage, whatever your faith, whomever you love and however you identify, today you are a part of our spiritual community. Welcome. And now, to start our service, we present a poem by Alana Bluebird. Alana is a Canadian Blackfoot Dene writer, poet, and a performing artist who uses her creativity to empower youth. She is from the Tsuut'ina Nation and expresses herself through poetry, photography, film, and quill work.
As I right my wrongs, I banish them from all timelines, realities, and dimensions. I have these spiritual comprehensions, acknowledging the depths of my soul. I learn to have self-control by letting go of being controlling of everything I've been holding. Like snow falling from a dark cloud, my heart begins to speak aloud, opening my eyes to see my soul, to find my true role.
Chalice, chalice, burning bright, help remind us with your light of how we'd like to live each day, with love and truth helping lead the way.
Hi to everyone, it's Nao, your Director of Religious Exploration. Hope everyone is well on this Sunday. Today I'm reading to you a little poem. It's titled Let's Pretend, and it's written by Devin Kira Murphy. Let's pretend we're still innocent. Let's pretend we're still willing to trust anyone. Let's pretend we still believe that good can always win the fight over bad. Let's pretend that we still believe that any dream can come true. Let's pretend we can still believe in these things. Let's pretend. I hope everyone enjoyed that little piece. Please check the EU for RE activities. We are now holding outdoor RE in the children's playground every Sunday at 2. Hope to see you there. Wishing everyone a great Sunday.
This is the time in the service where we recognize the personal joys and sorrows that people have asked to be recognized. I place a stone of sorrow. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not a sorrow, it's a joy. From Roxanne for her dad, Maynard, who had cancer surgery recently and who pulled through at the age of 88, and he is still standing. So that is a joy.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love.
Hello. In April 2021, our congregation sent 19 members to participate in this year's UU-UNO conference, which normally takes place in New York City, but this year it was held online. Our group included 2 of our youth and 4 young adults. As well, 3 of our delegates acted as small group facilitators for the conference. Together, we learned about the intersection between climate justice, food sovereignty, and anti-racism. The conference included workshops on how we can take political action. We learned about agroforestry. As well, there were many opportunities to learn new songs and participate in worship every day. Some of the content of today's service is taken from the conference. We wanted to share it with you. Our guest speaker today, Leah Penniman, is the Executive Director of Soul Fire Farm and author of Farming While Black. Soul Fire Farm, located in Petersburg, New York, provides opportunities for Black and other diverse communities to become involved in food education, production, and distribution of food. Her incredible presentation, Uprooting Racism, Seeding Sovereignty, includes the history of oppression in our food systems while sharing hope and vision with respect to access to justice in the future.
Nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society.
Tumbuhlah seperti padi. Semakin berbuah, semakin merunduk. Grow like a rice paddy. The more you have knowledge, the humble you become.
Down where we are, food is used as a political weapon. But if you have a pig in your backyard, if you have some vegetables in your garden, you can feed yourself and your family, and nobody can push you around.
Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality.
I was raised pulling food out of earth. I know where joy comes from, how to make it.
Until I am free, you are not free either.
Nobody's gonna hand you your freedom. You're gonna have to take it.
Work is love made visible.
Perdón, si cuando quiero contar mi vida es tierra lo que cuento. Esta es la tierra. Crece en tu sangre y creces. Si se apaga en tu sangre, tú te apagas.
I want to beg of you to always keep your eyes open to what Mother Nature has to teach you. By doing so, you will learn many valuable things every day of your life.
I don't have a minute to hate. I will pursue justice for the rest of my life.
The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others.
Greetings, peace and blessings. My name is Leah Penniman, and I am the farm manager and co-director at Soul Fire Farm in Mohican Territory, Grafton, New York. Today, we are going to talk about uprooting racism and seeding sovereignty in the food system. But before we start, we need to pay homage and give thanks to those who made it possible for us to be here, our ancestors. And I want to call in one particular ancestor, my grandma's grandma's grandma. Her name is Susie Boyd, and like so many women in the 16 and 1700s in the Dahomey region of West Africa, she was faced with near certain kidnapping and being forced into the bowels of slave ships. And in the face of that terror and uncertainty, she had the courageous audacity to gather up millet, cowpea, black rice, okra, egusi melon, and the other seeds her family had saved for generations, and to braid them into her hair, believing against odds in a future of tilling and reaping on soil, and believing that we, her descendants, would exist to inherit and carry on that seed. I ask you in this moment to think of an ancestor who had foresight for you, who made a sacrifice for you, and out loud, call their name. Ashe. I also want to pay homage and give thanks and acknowledge the original peoples of the land upon which I stand right now. This is Stockbridge, Munsee Mohican territory, and Haudenosaunee territory. Many of the first peoples of this land were forcibly removed in the 1800s to a small reservation in northern Wisconsin. I'm not just saying their names as an empty acknowledgement, but as a pledge of solidarity. We have a relationship with the Mohican people on their terms that includes a cultural respect easement, seed exchange, and voluntary taxation. I welcome you to enter into a relationship of solidarity with the people upon whose stolen land you now sit. The third thank you I want to give before we embark on our storytelling is to my team. In the US, we have this hero industrial complex where we think Martin Luther King was the civil rights movement or Vandana Shiva is ecofeminism. But the truth is, none of us gets anywhere by ourselves. I'm here because of Kiani and Naima, because of Justin and Jonah and Larissa and Brooke and the whole Soulfire team. And I also give thanks for your teams, the people who are mucking out the chicken stalls right now so that you can be here listening to this lecture. So along with the seeds that our ancestors braided into their hair, they braided knowledge and wisdom of right relationship with the earth and with human communities. So many of the organic agricultural practices that we cherish and take for granted as either European or ahistoric actually have Afro-Indigenous roots. Things like vermicomposting, things like terracing, raised beds, cover cropping, no-till systems, integrating livestock fertility with rice paddies, transplanting, fermentation, these amazing technologies that allow us to feed our communities without trashing the planet came with our ancestors across the Atlantic. When our ancestors got here, they tragically found that this food system was not rooted in a respect for ecosystems and for human communities, but instead was rooted in stolen land and exploited labor. And any aspect of the food system that you look at, from land to labor to ecology to capital to access to food, you see racial disparities baked into the very DNA. And we have to go all the way back to 1455 to understand the origins of this tragedy. This is when Pope Nicholas of the Catholic Church put out a decree called the Doctrine of Discovery that said that white Christian nations not only had the right, but the obligation to go forth, enslave, pillage, and steal the lands of non-Christian, non-white nations who were seen as less than human. This doctrine of discovery became the basis for U.S. property law, upheld by the Supreme Court from 1823 all the way to 2005, and used as justification for dispossessing indigenous people of 150 billion acres of land, pushing off the buffalo, destroying ecosystems, and planting a flag to claim sovereignty for the colonizer. Stolen land and exploited labor became the DNA of the U.S. food system. We know that 12.5 million African people survived the journey across the Atlantic in the bowels of slave ships. Millions more perished in the waters. And contrary to popular mythology, Black people weren't stolen for strong backs and bulging biceps, but actually for our agricultural expertise. It is brick cold in Northern Europe. That's not where you grow indigo, cotton, sugar, and tobacco. It's not where you grow rice paddies. And so slavers targeted agricultural experts across Western and Central Africa in order to bring that expertise to build the $10 trillion agricultural industry of the, quote, New World. They specifically stole Mende and Wolof rice farmers to establish the rice paddies of the Carolinas that made those communities so wealthy. And it would be a relief to think that after the formal end of chattel slavery in 1865, that somehow the United States had a moment of reckoning and said, this food system rooted in stolen land and exploited labor, it's got to change. But unfortunately, that exploitation just morphed into new forms. The South was in a complete freakout after the end of the Civil War, fearing that they would lose their access to free and exploitable labor. So they exploited a loophole in the 13th Amendment, which said that slavery is outlawed except in the case where a person has been convicted of a crime. So new crimes came onto the books called the Black Codes. For the first time, it was illegal to loiter. Now, loitering means standing around. For the first time, it was illegal to be a vagrant. Vagrancy is a fancy way of saying unemployment, specifically not having a year-long contract on a plantation. It became illegal not to be industrious and honest, the punishment for which was to have your children stolen away from you and apprenticed to their former masters. The prisons filled with Black people, not for actual crimes, but for these imagined crimes, which then allowed them to be leased back to the plantation, back to the mines, and back to the railroads, a practice so common that in the late 1800s, over 75% of Alabama's state budget came from leasing Black bodies to plantations. And recently, 2019 to 2020, we have seen a resurgence of this practice of convict leasing because of the draconian immigration policies under the 45 administration. There's a shortage of pickers on the plantation. And so Black men are once again put out to the fields for no and low pay to bring food to the tables of America. Now, those people who were not forced on the plantations through convict leasing stayed on the plantations through sharecropping, which is a debt peonage system where the one who calls themselves master and owner literally owns the mule, the seeds, the house, the clothing on the back of the farmers, the tools and equipment, all the things that make it possible to bring in a cotton crop. And those workers toil 7 days a week on that cotton crop, and they have to pay back the owner at the end of the year in a share of the cotton. But unfortunately, the scales were tipped both literally and figuratively, so most sharecroppers were in more debt at the end of the year than they were at the beginning. And they were so impoverished that a very rare niacin deficiency disease called pellagra was rampant among the sharecroppers. This is what radicalized Fannie Lou Hamer. When she was only 6 years old, she was put out to the fields to work as a sharecropper. And she noticed that the plantation owner would adjust the scales to undervalue the cotton harvest and make sure that the workers were trapped year after year in that cycle of debt. She went in the night and adjusted the scales back to correct. And in her memoir says, that is the moment I became an activist. Now, something that astounds me is despite all of the obstacles against our people, the sharecropping, the tenant farming, the convict leasing, the just been out of slavery, right? Somehow that yearning for land lit a fire that could not be quenched. You know, when our ancestors in 1865 met with General Sherman of the Union Army and he said, "What is it y'all need?" They responded, "What we need are homes and the ground beneath them, so that we can plant fruit trees and say to our children, these are ours." And so they saved up their money for generations, working second and third jobs off the plantation, so that by 1910, they finally could purchase almost 16 million acres of land in aggregate, which represented 14% of the nation's farms and the peak of Black land ownership. Now, we're talking about 2 5-acre parcels of marginal land, but it still was their own and a deep source of pride and autonomy. Now, as you can imagine, in the South at that time, there was really no greater threat than Black economic independence. And so the backlash against this trend of Black land ownership was swift and severe. The Whitecaps, the Ku Klux Klan, the White Citizens Council, they came out in force, burning crosses, shooting people, lynching people, threatening people. In fact, there are over 4,000 documented cases of Black people losing their lives for being too uppity as independent business owners and having their land stolen from right out under their murdered bodies. Needless to say, there was an exodus. So we're often taught in the history books that the Great Migration, when 6 million Black people fled the South to the paved streets of the urban North, that somehow they were seeking opportunities in factories. We are not often told that this is a refugee crisis, people fleeing for their lives. So of course, there was a labor vacuum left behind on the plantation. And the United States, addicted to stolen land and exploited labor, thought about who next can we have to bend their backs over these fields and feed us. And they turned overseas, to the Philippines, to China, to Mexico, to Jamaica, to Guatemala. And through programs like Bracero, H2, and H2A, which are all migrant guest worker programs, created these restrictive visas that brought workers over to do work that many Americans would refuse to do. A story. A friend of mine teaches at an agricultural university in the Midwest. The classroom is filled with students, all aspiring farmers, all eager for a life on land. The professor says to the students, "How much would you need to be paid by the hour to work in the meat packing plant in town? $10 an hour, 15, 20, 40? The hands stayed down. There was not one student in that class who would work in that meat packing plant for any amount of money. And they said, "That's Mexican work." I can shake my head and tisk at that comment, but I have to ask myself, in what ways am I complicit with a food system that relies on creating climate chaos, warfare, and economic deprivation so severe across the so-called borders of the so-called United States that indigenous people would leave land that they own and families that they love as much as you love your own family to cross a dangerous border into an uncertain and hostile territory, to stoop over the fields, to kill 2,000 hogs a day in a meat packing plant that none of y'all would work at for any amount of money, and nor would I. And that is how over 85% of our food gets to our plates, through that system of deprivation. And it is baked in to US law. In the 1930s, when white Americans were celebrating the dawn of a new era for labor under FDR's New Deal, we finally had Social Security. We had the 8-hour workday. We had child labor protections. We had the right to unionize. We had the right to a day off so we could rest and be with our families. At that very same time, Black and brown workers, farm workers, agricultural workers, food workers, domestic workers were excluded from those provisions. And to this day, the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act do not include the people who do arguably the most important work for our society, which is to feed us. That is the system in which we are complicit. Not all the Black farmers fled. Many people stayed and held on to their few acres of land and held on to their autonomy and dignity as best they could. But they were confronted with another enemy. And tragically, that enemy was the federal government itself in the form of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The USDA is responsible for supporting the American farmer through crop allotments, loans, grants, and technical assistance. Yet systematically, they denied this support to Black farmers over generations, while white farmers got those resources. So after 2 years of drought, a white farmer would go down to their county agent office and fill out an application for irrigation and receive that resource on the spot. Whereas the Black farmer would either never hear back or hear back so late that the seed could not be planted that year. And during the civil rights movement, these USDA programs were sharpened into weapons to punish civil rights activity. So if it was found out that you registered to vote as a Black farmer, joined the NAACP, signed a petition, your application would be thrown in the trash right in front of your face. Generations of this resulted in massive foreclosures, to the point where the U.S. Commission of Civil Rights in the 1960s said that the federal government was the #1 cause of the decline of the Black farmer and would have the blood of the extinction of the Black farmer on their hands. Now, the Black farmers rose up. They sued the government. And in the 1999 Pigford v. Glickman case, they actually won the largest civil rights settlement in the history of this country at $2.3 billion. Now, granted, it was too little too late. With a median payout of $50,000, you can barely get your tractor back, and certainly not your lands. And most of the plaintiffs by then were in their 80s and 90s, too tired to start over. But the thing is that this case proved that the decline of the Black farmer from 14% of the nation's farmers to just over 1% today was not because we didn't know how to farm, because we didn't want to farm, because we didn't love and yearn for the land, but because whole systems of racist oppression were stacked up to expel us from that land that held our blood. Racism in the North looks a little different. We don't have the cross burnings and the lynchings, but we do have the police violence and the redlining. So when our ancestors came up to the paved streets of Pittsburgh and New York and Boston, what they found is that they couldn't become land and homeowners even here, because back in the 1930s, the federal government had actually commissioned maps to be made that ranked neighborhoods from most desirable for banks to lend to down to least desirable, with Black and brown communities outlined in red and banks told do not lend. At the same time, they issued zoning regulations to prevent the, quote, intermixing of inharmonious racial groups, right next to the section on nuisance livestock. So Black people were ghettoized within the red lines, and they could not own homes within the red lines. This was especially poignant at the end of World War II, when the GI Bill came out and white soldiers coming home from the war could enjoy 0% mortgages, courtesy of the federal government. In our area alone in upstate New York, 67,000 of these free mortgages were given out, yet less than 100 went to any person or any family that was non-white because of redlining. Now, you might think, what does this have to do with food? But here's the thing. 80% of wealth in this country is inherited, and most of that is property. So it's no accident that these very same redlined zip codes are the zip codes where it's hard to access quality education. It's hard to find fresh food. People are incarcerated at dramatic rates because of over-policing. In fact, the zip code that you live in is the #1 determiner of your life expectancy in America today. Our communities are just as segregated now as they were before the Housing Rights Act was passed. That means that a white baby born today on average is 16 times wealthier when they draw their first breath than a Black child born today. And it's not because that white child was doing calisthenics in the womb and taking financial literacy classes before they came out, right? It is because that wealth was passed down, that unearned privilege was passed down through boosts and blocks through generations. It brings us to where we are today, where farm workers who are Latinx and Hispanic comprise over 85% of the labor that brings food to our tables, yet only 2% of the management, and still do not have basic labor protections like overtime pay, the right to unionize, and the right to a day of rest. It brings us to where we are today, where 98% of the rural land in this country is white-owned. I'm going to say that again. 98% of the ground in this country that can grow food is white-owned, which is actually more racially skewed than ever before in our history. Not because we don't love and yearn for the land, but because the land was wrested out from underneath us and passed down among the privileged few. And it brings us to where we are today, where I think it's no accident that the way we've treated the human beings who are closest to the earth is echoed and amplified in the way we treat the earth herself, right? When colonizers first came to the Great Plains, within only one generation, that's 28 years, they had ripped 50% of the soil carbon out of the earth and burns it up into the atmosphere because of plowing, launching anthropogenic climate change and reducing that soil fertility by over a third. Today, industrial agriculture is a leading driver of climate change, of water withdrawals, of loss of biodiversity, of land conversion. And again, it's not that we don't know how to grow food in a way that nourishes community and the planet. Remember the seeds in our ancestors' hair. We have chosen racial capitalism as the holy grail of our society and ignored and subjugated indigenous wisdom about right relationship with the earth. In this time of multiple pandemics attacking our breath at every turn, from the choking of COVID to the choking of wildfire to the choking of police brutality, we see now more than ever the cracks in our industrialized food system and runaway capitalism laid bare. People who never before have experienced being let down by the system are feeling the pinch of empty grocery store shelves and unemployment checks that never arrive and unrest in the streets, and are waking up to the fact that maybe the Black and brown folks who have been screaming fire for centuries were telling the truth. Let this moment not be a fad, but a permanent awakening to our sovereignty. So I'm going to tell you the good news about what we, essential workers on the front lines, are doing to uproot racism and seed sovereignty in the food system, and how you can get involved. First, I invite you to a moment of reflection. Where were your ancestors in this history? How are your people connected to the events that we just explored? I'm inviting you to take a moment of reflection. The good news is that whenever there was oppression and subjugation of our people, there was resistance and creative uprising wider, deeper, and more powerful than that oppression. There were those in every generation who remembered the legacy of the seeds braided into our ancestors' hair and passed down as legacy to us. Back in 2005, when we started dreaming up Soulfire Farm, we asked ourselves, what would it be like to start a farm for the people based on this legacy? Based on the challenge that Fannie Lou Hamer put forth to us, saying, if you have 400 quarts of greens and gumbo soup canned for the winter, nobody can push you around or tell you what to say or do. And this idea that to be truly free, we need to feed ourselves became the basis of the work at Soulfire Farm. We looked back at the generations of ancestors who had not forgotten the legacy of the seeds braided into the hair. Ancestors like Dr. George Washington Carver, one of the founders of regenerative and organic agriculture in this country in the late 1800s, 2 whole generations before Rodale, the so-called founder of organics. When he was on the founding faculty of Tuskegee University, he trained a whole generation of farmers to care for the soil through cover crops, through mucking out the wetlands and piling up that muck as compost, through gathering leaves in the forest to mulch and grazing animals in rotation. He saw the devastation of the monocropped cotton fields and the promise of the legume, which is able to make friends across kingdoms with a little rhizobial bacteria, and together they pull nitrogen out of the air and put it into the soil where plants can use it, and in that way healed thousands of acres across the South, right? We called in ancestors like Booker T. Whatley, also at Tuskegee University, the founder of the Farm to Table movement. At a time when wholesale just was not working for Black farmers competing with white farmers, he came up with the idea of diversified horticulture, of the CSA, or community-supported agriculture, and the wild idea of pick your own. Booker T. Whatley hypothesized that city folks were pining for the country, and they would actually pay farmers for the privilege of picking strawberries and pumpkins and apples on the farm in order to quench that thirst for rural life. And he was right. Now, pick your own, the CSA, and Farm to Table are the primary ways that small, diversified farms like ours can make a living. We at Soulfire Farm decided to build our agricultural practices based on these rememberers. So we too use cover crops, diversified horticulture of vegetables, livestock, herbs, and fruits. We have raised beds and no-till, tall mulch and compost piles. And every single year of using these practices, we observe the soil get better. We have now restored our soils to pre-colonial indigenous levels of organic matter. We have tripled the depth of the topsoil. We have diversified the pollinators who call this home, all by using these Afro-Indigenous practices that were passed down to us by these rememberers. And this extends to our buildings as well. Heated with the sun, built of straw bales and clay from the earth, tall pine timbers harvested sustainably and locally and clustered together in a small area on the land so that we leave over 70 acres for the wildlife. We embody these ecological practices passed down to us by our forebears. We call upon the rememberers of the seeds in the Black Panther Party, who fed 20,000 children free breakfast every single morning in Oakland as part of their survival programs. They also brought groceries to elders, drove people to appointments, helped loved ones connect with political prisoners who were incarcerated, and more. And so we decided that a core principle of our work would be these survival programs, which is why the harvest of the land is boxed up every week and brought to the doorsteps of the people who need it most in our community: refugees, immigrants, people who are surviving food apartheid and state violence, and folks can pay whatever they can afford down to zero for this life-giving food. We pay homage and give thanks to our rememberers at Tuskegee University, Thomas Campbell, and the other founders of extension agencies in the United States. Originally, all they could afford was a mule and a cart, and they would go out to the rural areas, find the most dilapidated farm, and fix it up with an extreme farm makeover that included pruning the trees, adding compost and cover crops, nursing the livestock back to health, and that farm would become the demonstration farm that folks would come to far and wide from the entire county to learn from, and then they'd move on to the next county. This is Each One Teach One, and this became the foundation for our educational programs at Soulfire Farm. We invite aspiring Black and brown farmers from across the country to come learn and grow and live with us here at Soulfire Farm. Through our week-long farming immersion, day-long bilingual English-Spanish workshops, season-long apprenticeships, and week-long Liberation on Land youth camps, we are training and inspiring the next generation of Black and brown farmers. We are part of the returning generation of farmers, those whose grandparents and great-grandparents fled the red clays of Georgia for the paved streets of the urban north, escaping violence and seeking a better life. Yet we have now awakened to the fact that we left a piece of our souls, our culture, our very being behind in those soils. And as Chris Bolden Newsom would say, the land was the scene of the crime, but I would add, the land was never the criminal. And in fact, we may have confused in our hearts the oppression that took place on the land with the land herself, naming her enemy and running from that soil, thinking that if we stoop, if we squat, if we even get dirty, if we touch an insect, somehow that would revert us to bondage. But here in these programs on this land, we are reclaiming our noble and dignified agrarian history as Black people. And this is not just about being commercial farmers. We are also teaching home provisioners, right? In the words of Lenny Sorensen, if you ain't growing food for yourself and your children, what on earth are you doing? So we have a program called Soulfire in the City, founded by Amani Olugbala, that builds raised bed gardens in the backyards of survivors of food apartheid. It provides soil and seeds and plants and technical assistance to help folks embody that idea that to free ourselves, we must feed ourselves. And this extends also beyond the boundaries of the so-called United States. Through intercambio, or exchange of ideas and resources with peasant farmers in Haiti, Brazil, Mexico, and Ghana, we are part of an international movement of Each One Teach One called Via Campesina, resisting the industrial takeover of our food system and fighting for our sovereignty. We pay homage to the ancestors who remembered the seeds and used those seeds to found the first ever land trusts and co-ops in the United States. Ancestors like Fannie Lou Hamer, who was teased for having cans of peaches and gumbo soup lining the walls of her home, even as she mobilized for the right to vote and for the right to have a seat in the Democratic Party. But she believed that to get free, we must feed ourselves, and so founded the Freedom Farm in Sunflower County, Mississippi, where sharecroppers who'd been kicked off the land for the audacity to register to vote could find a home and co-ownership of land. They made enough money selling vegetables and livestock that they were able to provide scholarships, burial fees, and housing for all 70 of their member families. Ancestors like the founders of New Communities, Inc., in 1969 was the first ever community land trust in the United States where 500 Black families came together to co-own almost 6,000 acres of land in Albany, Georgia, sparking the community land trust movement, which is now thousands strong across the United States. And so we asked ourselves, how do we build on that legacy? And together with our alumni and our sibling farms, we started a land trust and a co-op. The land trust is called Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and its goal is rematriation of land to Indigenous people and restoration of permanent, secure land tenure for Black and Brown farmers. NEFOC receives gifts in the spirit of reparations of acres and transfers those acres together with permanent legal protection to those who've been dispossessed. Both the co-op that we started and the land trust afford rights of nature to the lands. Just like the Ojibwe people gave rights to Manuman, their rice, and in New Zealand they gave rights to a river, in the legal bylaws of these organizations, the land doesn't just have a vote, but a veto over the proposed human activities. And in addition to starting our own co-op and land trust, we've supported the cooperative projects of our alumni. Projects like Katatumbo Farm Cooperative, which is an immigrant-owned urban farm that provides food to the front lines in Chicago. Projects like Love Fed New Haven, which supply urban farms to folks who need them most in community. High Hog Farm in Georgia, which is supporting Black folks and getting back into the fiber industry and reclaiming the dignity there. Our alumni started Percussion Farms in the Northwest, which is a Black and Brown-led community farm providing food to those who need it most, and People y Alimentos, which is a Spanish-first language justice urban farming project. We believe in biomimicry as our model for growth. Just as the forest shares sugars and minerals and messages through a network of fungal mycelium protecting its family members across the land, so do we see our strength in the way that we share our resources with one another. It's not about one organization franchising or getting bigger and gobbling up the rest. It is about this trans-local web of mutual support and interdependence that we have with Black and Brown growers across the nation. One of the ways that we support these co-ops, land trusts, and community-based projects is through reparations. Now that might sound like a dirty four-letter word, but as my mentor Ed Whitfield said, imagine if your neighbor came over to your house in broad daylight and stole your cow. Everybody saw him do it. There was no question that this happens. A week later, the neighbor comes with remorse in their face and tears in their eyes, begging for forgiveness, and they say, I'm gonna make it up to you. I stole your cow, and for the rest of the cow's life, I am going to bring you half a pound of butter every week. Now, what would you say? I would say I want my cow back. And the stolen lands and wealth ripped from underneath the hands and feet of Black and Brown people is that cow, and reparations is due. Reparations means repair. And so until the government catches up and passes HR 40 and institutes wholesale reparations, we are doing people-to-people reparations. You can check out the reparations map where you can find Black and Brown-led projects all across the country that need support, and go ahead and give what is due. We pay homage to those who remembered the seed parades and were instrumental in the civil rights movement. There quite literally would be no civil rights movement without the Black farmers who provided the housing, the legal protection, the lookout, the meeting space, the food for those activists who were engaged in Freedom Summer and the surrounding struggles. So we asked ourselves, how do we build upon this organizing energy of the civil rights movement, of the Immaculate workers, of the United Farm Workers, of the Haitian peasant movement, and go beyond just what we can do here on this sacred ground towards how we can impact system change and societal change? Together with our comrades at the National Black Food Injustice Alliance and the Heal Food Alliance, we are advocating to change the fundamental structures of our food system through advocacy. We contributed to language for the Green New Deal, for the Breathe Acts, and for new legislation coming out called the 2020 Justice for Black Farmers Act. We helped to create the Black Farmer Fund, which is a finance vehicle to support Black farmers in places where the USDA has fallen short, and to band together with farm workers across the nation for the 2020 Fairness for Farm Workers Act. And we are hopeful. For the first time ever In my 25-year food justice career, every single candidate for the Democratic nomination for president asked our coalitions what they can do for Black farmers. Times are changing, and a new world is possible. And in paying homage to the remembers of the seed braids, we also need to give thanks to those who remained on the continent. The Queen Mothers of the Dahomey region of West Africa and my personal teachers. When I first lived with them in my early 20s, they said, Leah, is it true that in the United States, a farmer will put a seed in the ground and they will not pray or sing or dance or pour libations or even say thank you to the earth, and they expect that seed to grow? When I admitted in silent shame that that was true, they added, that is why you're all sick. You're sick because you see the earth as a commodity and not a relative. So in remembering that lesson, we too decided to integrate a spiritual ecology to our practice at Soulfire Farm. We dance, we sing, we pray, we pour libations, we ask permission, and we treat the earth as the mother and relative that she is. My belief is that everyone who eats food and lives on land is responsible for healing and repairing the food system so that it's no longer based on stolen lands and exploited labor, but instead is based on a sacred covenant between the earth and her human inhabitants. As my daughter Nishima says, the food system is everything it takes to get sunshine onto your plate. So the good news is that there are thousands of points of intervention and thousands of right answers to the question, what can I do to help? There are people who choose to focus on farm worker rights, on land rematriation, on getting fresh food to those who need it most, and on holding corporations accountable for the way they're trashing the planet and our health. All of these are right answers. But what these right answers have in common is that they are accountable to the people most impacted by those issues. And in the case of racism in the food system, that means Black and brown folks taking leadership in the food system. This means deferring to and following the leadership of people most impacted by racism in the food system. That means Black and brown leaders in the food system. Folks like Malik Yakini, Karen Washington, Giovanna Johnson Cook, Gail Myers. Organizations like Land Loss Prevention Project, National Black Food and Justice Alliance, SAFON, CATA, Fresh Future Farm, Bugs, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, Black Farmer Fund of New York, and the Black Church Food Security Network. In all cases, when thinking about what to do to help, the question should be, does my action transfer power, resources, and dignity to those on the front lines? And if the answer is yes, then your answer is yes. The time is done for the white savior complex. The time is done when white-led nonprofits go into communities of color imagining that what we need is kale salad cooking classes in our kindergarten. We, communities of color on the front lines, can and will define what is needed and are capable of taking the lead and charting the way toward a healed food system. You can find more action steps on our website at soulfirefarm.org/takeaction. For our closing poem, I'm going to turn it over to my womb and soul sister, Soulfire Farm's program director, Leah Penniman.
Every patch of earth unencumbered by concrete, where soil and atmosphere meet, be a portal to presence, a terrain of remembrance, a vote for survival in an unpromised future. These gardens are blueprints of interdependent destiny, intergenerational memory, saving seeds for food as remedy, reclaiming our great-great-great-grandmother's recipes, our ancestral technologies, Afro-Indigenous agroecology, dirt under fingernails, no shame or apology. In a time of manicured hands and monocrop lands, devalued labor and overpriced brands, we understand. Our food is grown in faraway places under neo-slavery, shipped thousands of miles by underslept drivers, prepared by dignified immigrants, diminished on night shifts, supper delivered to our doorsteps from a swipe of our fingerprints, stripped of virtue and nutrients. And who's gonna stop this? Our shelves are still stocked with processed products, toxic food made for profit to keep us lethargic, too tired to riot, rise up, or take office, filled up on fillers and starches, diet-related illness, the #1 killer of Black and brown bodies. My people know what it's like to eat and still be starving. So we turning hardship into harvest, lawns and schoolyards into gardens, homegrown bounty in our palms. We come from soil and stardust, and so we conjure. Giving props to hood magicians who grow provisions for our kitchens. We smuggle spinach into prisons, transform the places that we live in. Trade psychosis for symbiosis and stay focused. Sprout sunflowers that tower on neighborhood blocks. Harvest raindrops on rooftops that water our crops. Propagate plant medicine for the metropolis. Guarding our plots, cause our gardens are not for profits or loss. Cross-pollinate the promise, fam. We got this. Take a deep breath. Restore calmness. With lemon balm bounty in our palms, hot peppers in our pockets, black-eyed peas spiraling up Lenape blue corn stalks with buttercup squash carpets, three sisters symbiotic, talking stories of solidarity on native territory. Migratory monarchs transcend borders, morning glories ascend fences. Pay attention to the lessons Mother Nature keeps expressing, how to multiply our blessings. For justice and sustenance amid glaring disparity, every seed saved will set us free. In an age of opulence and scarcity, every seed saved will set us free. In a time of intensifying violence and climate calamity, every seed saved will set us free. Hold on tight to the source. We have all that we need.
This is a time in our service that we usually accept the offering. You may go to our website or contact our finance manager to find out how you might keep up with your pledge or make a donation during these very unusual times. We give these gifts freely. We receive these gifts gratefully. We dedicate these gifts to the work of the congregation, serving human wholeness, caring for the planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, loving one another. And now for the closing words, Everything is Still on Fire by UU Minister Teresa I. Soto. Everything is still on fire. Despite your best efforts in addition to living, it is clear that fire or not, you must level up in what it means to thrive. Right now, that means wrestling with the truth and the fact that everything is not all your fault. I am sorry that everything is still on fire. Once hate catches the winds of not my problem and blow and blaze, it is hard to stop. But hard is not impossible. Not yet is different than never. You in community have an answer. You have a response to systems of power and control and to the cost of suffering. You and your community together are the answer. You are not only a people of flame, but also a people of cold, clear truth. You know both where you fall short and where you flourish and where you still reach. Everything is still on fire, but all is not lost. You remain more nimble than steadfast, more unshakable than swayed by the latest rage. You are here to put out the ravenous flames and heal the world. Enough is enough. I will now extinguish the chalice.
Spirit of life,
Go in peace, go in love, go in joy, and may all be well.
Falling, we are falling now. Words written down, they are falling now. With the lies they will hurt you, hold on. Human kindness desert you, hold on. Let's start a revolution. Oh, beautiful it is. Let's start a revolution. Oh, beautiful it is. Running with a crown on your head, the resolution written on your hands, and the lies they won't hurt you no more. Human kindness desert you no more. Let's start a revolution. Oh, beautiful it is. Let's start a revolution. Oh, beautiful it is. The city's on fire, but it's beautiful. Revolution. The city's on